There we go. So again, welcome. We'll go ahead and get started here with an overview of our agenda. So let me get that shared. Make sure, can everyone see this?
Yeah, I can see it.
Excellent, good. We're going to get started here, 10 o'clock, right after we look at this. We're going to do a welcome, some introductions. We do have some new members on the rack today, so I want to make sure that they get a chance to introduce themselves and who they represent. After that, we'll do a review of the rulemaking process, where we are, and the next steps. Then we will recap the first meeting and address any of the RAC requested responses that we received during the last meeting, generally in the form of our review of the minutes. Then we will discuss the key issues or resolve to move the rules forward as we present them to you today, and why we made the changes that we did, and see if you have any concerns. After that, I want to reiterate that the RAC members do not have to stay if they do not want to, but I do have to stay until the public comment period at 11:45. So if we get done early, you are, of course, free to go on your merry ways. And yeah, and if there's any next steps, I can provide those to the public meeting participants as well. So we'll stop sharing this screen and perhaps start on an introductions if y'all are willing. I can call you out on the basis of who's popped up first in my list here. And at the top, I have Dr. Stephen Reese.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Steve Reese. I'm director of the Radiation Center here at Oregon State University. I'm also on the faculty of Nuclear Science and Engineering. Thank you.
Okay. Todd Carpenter.
Good morning. I'm Todd Carpenter, and I work with Radiation Protection Services with the X-ray registration and radioactive material licensing programs. Good to be here.
Patrick Brady.
Patrick Brady, General Director, Hazardous Material Safety, BNSF Railway.
And Patrick's one of our new members, so it's good. Thank you for introducing yourself. Tom Cecilia.
Hey everybody, Tom Cecilia, Oregon Department of Energy. I'm the Hanford Hydrogeologist and Fuel Specialist for the team.
Kieran Gray.
Good morning, everybody. Kieran Gray, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, High Hazard Rail Planner in the Emergency Response Section.
Yep, DEQ has helped us as an ex officio member on some of this, so Kieran's representing them. Glad he's here. We have, let me see here. Oh boy, Tiffany Brown.
Good morning, Tiffany Brown, Lane County Emergency Manager, also local government stakeholder for the Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission, OSPAC.
Okay. Mark Gibson.
Good morning, Mark Gibson. I'm the Government Relations Policy Advisor for the Oregon Trucking Association.
Great. Simone Anter.
Good morning, everyone. Simone Anter. I'm a senior attorney and the Hanford Program Director at Columbia Riverkeeper.
Okay. Tom Thaler.
Good morning, Tom Thaler, Radiation Safety Officer with Radiation Protection Services, and I'm sitting in for Hillary Haskins today.
Okay. Mark Reese.
Good morning, Mark Reese, Oregon Department of Energy, staff support for the meeting today. Thank you.
And Robert Bevier.
Good morning, Robert Bevier, Union Pacific Railroad. I'm the Senior Director of Hazardous Materials.
Yep. I think a lot of the members that were here previously can see we have invited two of the larger railroad companies to sit in on this rack. So without further ado, we'll get started on the review of the rulemaking process. Again, I'm going to share my screen. Yeah. Get my PowerPoint going here. Hopefully this is in presentation mode. Let me know if it's not. And this is the improper one. This is not the one that I should be sharing. No. Stop sharing that one. Okay. Put this into. So this is the list of the rack. We are missing a few people, as you might be able to see. And the rulemaking process. Here's where we are at right now. We are currently developing the draft proposed rules, which we have sent for you today. We will start after today a 33-day rack-only comment period on the red line preliminary edits that will be sent out, perhaps with some edits depending on what comments we get today in the meeting. We will incorporate all those comments into a final proposed rule set to be presented in the final, expected to be January RAC meeting. After that, we expect the rules or proposed rule changes to go to FSEC. You can submit comments on all this material to either myself or Tom Jackman, who will also be, sending more material to you momentarily, a little bit later. So after that, we have ourselves. That's a recap. Does anyone have any questions about how the process is supposed to go? Anything like that? Hearing none, I guess we'll move on to a recap of our first meeting. Since I already have the presentation up, I'll get started at the top. So as always, we're part of Oregon Department of Energy. This is what we do. On behalf of Oregonians across the state, we work as a central repository of energy data, information analysis, a venue for problem solving. We do energy education, technical assistance, regulation and oversight, and energy programs and activities. Today in particular, we are addressing the Division 60 rule set, which is the transportation of radioactive materials within the state. Today's agenda, what we're going to talk about a little bit is the RAC's goal, which is evaluate the structure and fees imposed by Division 60 rules and assess whether what changes are recommended, if any. We're going to have the presentation on some of the things we talked about last time and the proposed changes in the rules this time. We're going to have talk about those discussion items that came up, the various sets of them. Some were in emergency response, some were in fee collection, shippers versus carriers, how other states do the work, how we're going to expand the fees, perhaps to other forms of transport. As many RAC members noted, rail is currently exempt from this fee set. Explore volume-based fee structure, which, kind of spoiler alert, we discarded that, and enhancing collection of fees to special permits, also discarded due for some reasons, but mostly the complexity of the way that rule set works and the way the authorities are derived. Every RAC member should be prepared to provide their input on key areas, and we would really like to see comments on the red lines that we will send out after this meeting. We'll have a Q&A, a rough schedule for the next meeting, like I said, probably in January, unless the committee is prepared to give recommendations at this time. If you're happy with how things look and so okay, we'd still love to see that in comments, please. That also helps us when we move this material to FSEC. And of course, we will provide the minutes and the summary of all the comments made for the potential Division 60 proposals. We are missing a few of our updated RAC members, so we'll be sure to send them this information as well. Again, the rulemaking process, at the close of this, it starts the 33-day RAC only for you, comment period. Why are we here today? So we're starting to find that we do not have enough funds to provide even a minimum level of service and training to to emergency responders when it comes to radioactive materials responses. You can see the slide on the left, the numbers of shipments have been consistently declining year over year since at least 2010. We're hoping that we've hit somewhat of a bottom around the 200 level, and 2024, some of the preliminary data collected from there, is also around the 200 level. On the right, you can see the balance, how things have been declining within the budgets for our going out to train these first responders. It's been declining year over year. Our average annual deficit is around $7,000. On average, revenue was 70% of expenditures. When this rule set was last checked was back in 1983, was when this was last done, and no changes have been made since then. And that needs to be corrected. Commenters, last time, commenters hit upon the train exemption. So what that is within the current rule sets, trains do not pay the same fees at all that the road, the truck carriers pay. There are some reasons for this, is that the rule set was designed to capture information at ports of entry, which railroads do not go through. In 2022-24, ODOT only reported 12 Class 7 shipments by rail. Remember, again, the way we discriminate what's covered under these rules is what is placarded as a Class 7. Class 7 are the radioactive shipments. Half of those may have been exempted as U.S. military shipments. The DoD is not subject to these rule sets at all. The Department of Defense, excuse me. Now, that limited amount of material would only be at most $480 would have gone into the fund if this rail had been subjected to it. So admittedly, currently it's a small amount. But the department, Oregon Department of Energy, is expecting an uptick in rail transportation when it comes to hazard placarded Class 7 materials. The Hanford Nuclear Project, which is up in Richland, Washington, just north of the border, is expected to add between 60 to 110 rail transportation events per year from the 200 West project. This project is the retrieval of 32 million gallons of low activity waste from underground storage tanks in that 200 West area. This material may either be shipped as liquid or could be grouted on site and shipped. Right now, DOE's options are still open. They have the option of using truck or rail. They are currently trying to keep the options open of either using solid or liquid shipments. If this project occurs, and if it's to go through Oregon, as some of the routing is expected, the routes would go to Clive, Utah, and Andrews, Texas. The Clive, Utah route, the most efficient routing that we have seen, or ODO has seen, does go through Oregon. If FSEC was to set the fee, if the RAC recommends the changes to add rail and the new fee level at $125, that would be $7,500 to $13,750 of more training and equipment per year, just dedicated to radioactive materials and waste response and our hazardous materials response teams out there. Several states in the U.S. do assess a shipment fee on various types of radioactive waste, including low-level waste. In particular, when it comes to low-level waste, Indiana's at about $100 a load, and this is done by train, not by car. Iowa is $175, and Missouri, which most closely resembles the expected revenue amount we would need, or what we are expecting to set the fees at, that's Missouri, is at $125 a train. We had some comments about waste versus materials and the reason why we do charge for both. Class 7 shipments into Oregon and pass through ports of entry. That is how we get the information from Oregon Department of Transportation to Bill. They pass this information on to us. Now, the number of carriers is more limited than the number of shippers. In the past, 5 carriers have accounted for the majority of the fee collection. They're very specialized. Many of these carriers are highly specialized, highly trained to transport radioactive waste and materials. Again, the reason that this is done this way is this is specific to placarded materials. So DOT placarded materials, class 7, be it waste or material. The analysis, though, has found that we have a gap in both training and awareness. There is some reason to this. When the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration did an analysis on the number of shippers out there shipping radioactive class 7 materials, it was less than 1% of total shippers out there, which mirrors our levels of transportation events and the percentage that we expect to see in Oregon. So it's a very low amount. And since these fees, the hazmat fees that are collected in general revolve around the majority of shipments, in this case, flammable material shipments, which account for over half of the hazmat shipments out there. So emergency responders have very good training and experience with hazmat or corrosive type shipments versus the radioactive shipments, which often come in second place. Missouri, again, to bring them up, because they have a very similar scope. They only offer 1 to 3 trainings a year, and they have 1 reactor in state, 1 fission reactor. But they have over 500 transportation events just for low-level waste, unlike us, which have 200 for 2 to 250 for both low-level waste and materials. It is important to talk about carriers versus shippers. The carriers believe that they have undue burden placed upon them by the rule set because they are the ones responsible for paying the fees, ultimately, at least under Oregon's rule set. Carriers are those that transport the goods and materials and are responsible for compliance with the regulations. Shippers are dually responsible for compliance, but they are the ones that prepare the package for shipment. They arrange with the carrier, and they both, like I said, have that dual responsibility for ensuring compliance. The reason we do not want to change to doing shippers is we believe that carriers have superior knowledge and information on interstate transportation rules and regulations. They interact more frequently with the state and federal authorities on these levels. It's important to reiterate that there is nothing in the rule to prevent carriers from being able to recoup the costs by billing back to the shippers. To clarify and reassure the carriers, we have codified a change in the rule set, specifically in 345.060.0006, that subparagraph 1, that carriers are authorized to pass this fee on to shippers. Going a bit on the emergency response. Many commenters brought up that there is a disparity between some of the more rural hazmat teams and those that are maybe along the more urban I-5 corridor areas. And this is true. There is 200 miles over some somewhat rugged terrain that separates our hazmat response teams that are in both Ontario and Hermiston. The current hazmat fees, again, why this gap is here, most of the funds collected to our Office of Emergency Management are not dedicated to radioactive materials and radioactive material safety. So when you have a very heavily traveled corridor like this, with an expected increase in materials, we are actively seeking out ways to improve our coverage and training in this area. One portion of what we have proposed and that we heard from the RAC earlier is that the RAC should be able to adjust its fee and that we should have a periodic evaluation of the fee level. Our initial proposal is to have the fee done once every 4 years, starting in 2028 would be the first one. So the fee would then be checked in 2032, once every 4 years. We are planning, our initial impression is to use the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers services in the West index. This is a specific index just to our area, hopefully to get the closest representation of true costs and inflation in our region. At this time, we are also proposing to the RAC that there be some leeway put into the rules for something that is termed a ministerial act. This is something we still have to check with DOJ, but we really want the RAC's impression as well. In essence, if the adjustment, after every 4 years, if the adjustment would be less than or equal to the inflation rate, we could adjust it without having to go to the RAC again, without having to go to FSEC again, and go through this administrative process. If less, it would be, like I said, ministerial, but if greater, we would have to still go through the process, submission of rationale, comments to the FSEC, notices, public comments, and votes. Again, it's just a more involved process. So we're hoping to avoid future RAC and FSEC administrative burden that we might have this. We do still believe in the simplicity of a single fee. Some commenters were talking about different fee structures, a risk-based structure, perhaps charging for volume. Some states do have that risk-based structure, and they differentiate between low-level waste, LLW, high-level waste, HLW, spent nuclear fuel, SNF, and highway route controlled materials. The highway route controlled quantities is when you have to have a dedicated escort. Generally, the local, in our case, it would be OHP, Oregon Highway Patrol, or California Highway Patrol, or whatever it would be. But Patrol would provide an escort for the vehicle, and these costs would then compensate the patrol for their costs incurred. The rates are much higher, including Missouri, which charges, I want to say it's $1,300 even for transuranic materials for each of their large containers for that each, versus Oregon, which is still $125. We do believe there's value in single rate certainty. That way, you know, if you have a truck or a train, it's just $125. That's the cost. That's it. Also in our analysis, there are few, if any, shipments of high-level waste, spent nuclear fuel, and highway route controlled materials in Oregon. So changing or making the fees different would not accomplish the goal of the RAC, unfortunately. It would not help fund our programs out there for training and potential material support. So right now what we're at, in general, these fees the only changes are, we have moved to a $125 per shipment with 750 specific item cap. That specific item are things for like radiopharmaceuticals, moisture gauges, things of that nature. Stuff that has frequent transports within the state and that you would quite often meet that 750 very early as a form of relief. Move the temporary permit structure to $250 as well. We can talk a little bit about the difference between temporary and special permits, but right now that's outside of the changes that we've proposed. We added rail to balance the transportation modes that are responsible for paying the fee. We added the periodic review structure that we talked about earlier. Once every 4 years, the potential for the ministerial action, if less than inflation, and should the RAC continue to be used for future adjustments. In essence, that's that ministerial part. Should the RAC have to comment if we're only going to change it by 10% or whatever the rate of inflation was. We also index to this index, the Consumer Price Index, all urban consumer services in the West by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Is this too specific, or would the RAC prefer to see a different metric used? These are all materials and all things that we would like to see comments on when the RAC members do submit their comments. Again, I'm Matt Hendrickson. You can submit this either to myself or Tom Jackman, who you've had communications from, questions or your proposals and your edits that you'd like to see. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up now for questions.
Yeah, Matt, this is Mark from Oregon Trucking Association. Just a simple question in regards to indexing. Is that so? You're going to only make that review every 4 years. So are you using the inflation rate over that 4-year period, or just for that year of review?
It would be over the 4 year. It would be the cumulative 4-year period.
Okay, thanks.
At this point, our belief is that provides you'll have the rate surety for 4 years, and that any changes would actually be hopefully limited, but at least reviewed and meaningful. That also gives us a chance to take a look at the actual funding of the program and whether we have a surplus or not, and perhaps adjust the rates to meet the changes in transportation volume. Like we're expecting that greater volume from Hanford. If that helps to fund the program, then perhaps we can keep the rate level, which is the point, I think, of the ministerial act.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
No, thank you. I see a couple hands up. Let's see. Patrick Brady, you're up first.
So did I get you right, Matt, that you believe that Missouri is the closest to Oregon as far as the rules that you guys want to promulgate?
At this point, yes. They have at least within cost structure that would help us fund this program, they are the closest. They are not the closest when it comes to volume, as I mentioned. We have less than half of that, even with the materials included. We have less than half the volume that they do. But they are also close in the services offered, where they offer potentially some equipment support and maintenance support out there, and training. So they have between 1 to 3 trainings, depending on demand. They are fortunate, though, in that they do have a reactor in state so that they can rely on the NRC for some training support as well. So in the cost level, yes, they are the closest. So within the size, not as much.
All right. So and are you aware of the term common carrier?
Yes, we're talking about FedEx and such.
No, all railroads are common carrier. All railroads are common carriers. And if you look at the Missouri rule, the fee does not apply to shipments by common carrier. And that's important because most truck transportation, they're private carriers, and they can choose whether or not they want to transport things like radioactive materials. Whereas railroads are common carriers, and as long as it's packaged and described properly in accordance with both NRC, DOE, and DOT regulations, we must give them a acceptable rate and move it. So we don't have a choice on whether we can or cannot move their materials. The second thing is, can you speak to, I know that because I've taken it. There is a bunch of Department of Energy training that is available out there for first responders. How does the Oregon's program, training program, differ from the DOE's program? And is it somewhat not reinventing the wheel for Oregon to do it themselves?
Before I answer that, I might defer to Mark if he has input on that question. If not, I could take a
Sure.
stab.
I think, are you talking about the TEP and MERT training?
Correct, yes.
So we use TEP and MERT as an enhancement to the training that we're already providing through Dr. Steve Reese's program at Oregon State University. And also Todd Carpenter is also one of the trainers. So it's part of that. Plus inspectors themselves would go through CVSA level 6 as an example. So TEP and MERT would be brought in as an enhancement to what we've already been doing for decades.
So when you talk about CVSA, that is specific to truck transportation, is that right?
Correct.
Correct.
Where the TEP and MERT is broad from trucking, but also has a rail component too.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Just as another example related to training, as we're getting ready for the resumption of the transuranic shipments, the true shipments from Hanford, we're stepping up our in-state training that we've been doing through OSU and with help of RPS for our hazmat teams, but we're also going to bring in that TEP and MERT as an enhancement to that to get our first responders ready for those shipments to resume.
Okay. Todd, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question regarding your COLA fee proposal increases.
Mhm.
Do you know if you have that? Do you have the statutory authority for that? I personally ran into that doing rulemaking with our fees, and I couldn't move further because in our statutes we didn't have anything that addressed that.
There is, it gives my understanding, and this has not been gone over through DOJ yet,
No
is
worries.
that we have somewhat broad authority when it comes to transportation of radioactive materials within the state. Now, of course, that authority is not necessarily bounded because, as you know, with federal rules, the state can usually be a little more restrictive or set their own on certain items. But is this related specifically to the different types of permits?
Well, it's, I just kind of learned a lesson way back when I was writing rules for fee increases. We tried to plug in a COLA so we didn't have to keep going through rulemaking and statutory stuff every time. And when it went to the DOJ for review, they kicked it back at us and said we don't have the authority. So, and that just FYI, if nothing else.
Yeah. Yes. So that portion that I talked about, when it talks about a COLA and ministerial act, that needs to be reviewed by our DOJ. But we wanted to make sure that the RAC, at least for that portion, is comfortable with what was proposed, and if they have any other proposals or recommendations for us before we start looking at the cost of bringing in, the lawyer side.
Gotcha. Nope. You got it.
Mm-hmm. As soon as we have the rules, the red line rule sets online, we will send that link out. I can, if it would help, I can share my screen with what I have right now as a Word format. Or even attach a Word. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, so the particular portion that we're talking about here, where it talks about the adjustments, let me scroll on down till I find it, is this section right here, number 6. Take your time to read this real quick. Like I said, we got a little bit of time, it's looking like. Notwithstanding any other provisions of these rules, the Department of Energy shall, on a quadrennial basis, adjust the fee of this part to reflect the cumulative change in cost of services. So, fee adjustments shall be calculated on or before January 15th of 2028 and every 4th year thereafter. Right now, while we expect that the funds in our current funding level can support this program for 5 to 7 years at maximum, and this should provide us enough time to get out there and get notifications done to everyone. When making this adjustment, again, it's very specific. I try to keep it specific to the consumer price index here, all urban consumers. And here, the next one is where we talk about ministerial act. If this is allowed, if the RAC agrees that this is a proper approach, then we can bring this up to DOJ as well to see what they think about it. Department of Justice, excuse me. Any adjustment to the base fee pursuant to this section that is less than or equal to the cumulative percentage change in the index, the above index, for the corresponding period shall not require a formal approval of the council and is considered a ministerial act. That way, now, hopefully the rules don't languish for 4 years again. Just 4. And then finally, D, an adjustment to the base fee pursuant to this section that is greater than the cumulative percentage change. So say we're running real low on those funds again. Something's happened, maybe a shipment of radioactive materials has fallen off. Or, goodness gracious, it would be great, but Hanford's mission is completed, and now they're not having to ship true, or whatever it may be. We might need to increase the funding. And if that's true, we do believe that the RAC serves a vital role, and we want to keep the RAC and FSEC authorities over this, so that if the change is greater than the percentage, we would have to go through the process that we have done with y'all. While we're on this, does anyone want to see? Is this legible, or shall I zoom in a little more?
Looks good to me.
Okay. So again, I expect to have these red lines sent out to you. These are the initial draft red lines sent out to you after the close of today's meeting. And we are happy to entertain all comments, including things that might not look good for us. Maybe it is the common carrier problem. I also have to do more research in that. What other questions or items does anyone have? Oh, the silence is deafening.
Hi, could I ask a quick question? This is Simone.
Yes, Simone, please.
So you did mention this in your presentation, and I might have missed the discussion in the first meeting. But could you kind of go over why the proposed rule is choosing to keep just a one fee structure as opposed to maybe different fees for, say, liquid or solid waste, given that there would be different responses required?
Yeah, that does play into the value of the one fee situation. We looked into changing it for liquid or solid, but under the Class 7 rules, it's pretty hard to differentiate that. as well. And so that's a very
Just
that is a difficult
based on
thing.
that rule?
It is
Okay.
how these are assessed. Um, Patrick might have a response to that. Is that true, Patrick?
No, I don't.
Okay, some different.
But I generally agree that from a risk standpoint, obviously solids are a whole different animal than liquids. I agree with that.
No, we agree with that assessment as well. But the functioning of the program, having to get that extra information might be difficult. Again, we like the one fee rather than the risk-based fee. And while you can ship both liquid and solid radioactive waste, it would make the administration of the program a little more difficult, and it would create different categories that might push the department to look more into a risk-based a method. And then we'd also have to ask the question, and this is up for you to comment on, Simone, as well. Would we have the higher rate on solid material, or would we have a lower rate on solid material and keep 125 for liquids? There's various options that we could potentially do there.
Yeah, that's
But
definitely something to incorporate in your comments. And then what will happen with this comment period is Auto staff will come up with a response, like a comment matrix that we would then submit to the Energy Facility Siting Council, along with the proposed text, so they have some context of what the RAC was thinking, and how we got to where we are.
Do you think that fees are generally a poor way to fund first responder training? And what I mean by that is it's all after the fact. So let's say I'll use Union Pacific as an example. So let's say that a shipment, a unit train or a truck campaign, a one-time deal, so you have a unit train of radioactive material, contaminated soils, whatever it is. And it's only a one-time deal. It's a 100-car unit train, and it goes through Oregon. So you're gonna create a bunch of fees associated with that. But by the time you get the fees, the shipment is through the state, and generally that fee, that money would not go to train those first responders in the areas that train traveled, because it's all in the rears.
mm-hmm. That is a good question. My initial response, just from a gut level, is that's part of the reason why we have these rules where we do, is that we would expect that, at least with the uptick in potential train transport, it would be, and much of this money would be focused on that I-84 corridor. I believe Hinkle is in Hermiston, and things like that. Now, that is not to preclude other options. There are other options, and when I look at the rule set, when we're thinking about, well, what to do and how would we assess a fee or things like that, we can perhaps do other things where the department can work with carriers, maybe to put on training. Now, I don't think that I can make a rule set for this, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. As to making sure it gets to the first responders, that is the primary part of this. Perhaps I should have kept this slide in, but over 80% of our collections go to support this training. We do keep the administrative costs as low as possible. We have sought out other methods of reducing costs, such as going up to Ontario and Hermiston for these trainings, to give these trainings. That way we're not having to pay hotel bills for everyone to come, say, to OSU for our experts to give trainings, or Salem. We've also reduced the number of trainings offered per year and wait until we have a very full class until we give these. So we have explored the cost savings limitation methods to the maximum ability that we know how at this point.
And I'll just add, yes, there will be situations where there's one-off loads, and $125 for a unit train isn't necessarily going to have enough impact. But when we're looking at these prolonged and expanded shipping campaigns, where there's 12 trains per day or 50 trucks per day coming out of Hanford, that is going to be able to build that the roster of trained responders and maintain that roster as there's turnover in the industry.
Simone.
Hi, yeah, I have two questions that are unrelated to each other. But the first is, so through this rule, has a penalty component been considered in response to any potential emergency situation? Is that something that's able to be included in a rule like this?
I do not read the authorities that we have under here or what we have currently within statute and how we operate to really include the penalty portion.
Yeah, I think that would be covered under the fact that a lot of these are mixed waste, and so there would be DEQ oversight there.
And your second question?
And then the second question is there do you have an estimate for how much the fee increase will collect? And does that correspond to, say, like the number of increased first responders that'll be needed with the increased amount of shipments coming out of Hanford?
We did not evaluate especially the second part of your question. It's very hard to project the increased need for first responders if there will be, if our current capacity and expertise in the field cannot handle that. That is very difficult. But yes, as to the first part of your question, that is the reason why we chose to set at 125. It is right now our projected minimum amount to keep the fund for training stable.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I want to emphasize minimum. we tried to keep it as tight as possible. Did I see another question come up? Mark Gibson.
Yeah, Matt. So just so I'm clear, right now, the fees on trucking companies, carriers, are imposed based on their travel through ports of entry. Is that correct?
That is how it is reported to us, correct?
And it's reported by ODOT from the port, correct?
Correct.
So how is that determination going to be made for rail?
There is some of the edits that we made within the red line do provide some flexibility to rail. They do not stop at ports of entries. We do not want to stop them, at ports of entry. It doesn't exist. You get that 10,000, however many tons rolling down the rail, it's pretty hard to stop. I know, I used to drive one. So what we have done is, at least our initial thing is, we have tried to allow them to comply with the rules this is section 15 or 15 of 0004. Let me share my screen again. Okay, now let's zoom in. Now these are again draft, and we have to clear a lot of these rule changes with DOJ. But right now this is all within this subsection here, 004. It's very much specific on ports of entries, which don't apply to rail. We know and understand that. But it does. We're trying to exempt them from a lot of these things and the requirements that are under 004, but still comply with this section by submitting electronic information, self-reporting as in 15, which is the prior approval of department. So where we're lucky is that there are a limited amount of rail carriers. And I'm hoping, I probably shouldn't use the hope word, but I do believe that working with the individual carriers is possible on an individual basis, since there are few. And with prior approval, we would count them as not passing through a port of entry. We would count them as falling under 15. We can self-report, and that is a portion of it. So there's the 15 there, and then down here in fees, invoices rail carriers every 3 months for self-reported shipments or shipments reported to ODOT Rail Division. The railroads do have to report to ODOT. My understanding is they do have to report to ODOT Rail. Unfortunately, I don't believe we have any ODOT Rail folks with us today to clarify or show the untruth of what I'm saying. But they do have to report to rail, and every 3 months or a quarterly invoice. We're hoping that provides flexibility for them.
Okay, thanks.
And while we're on this page, you can see here that clarification for road carriers about any carrier required to pay the fee, and this would apply to rail as well, pursuant to this section, is authorized to pass along such fees to the shipping party. No portions of the fees shall be reduced or transferred to another vehicle. I would also say that this is something that might aid, especially the less than load carriers out there, or the Thomas Grays of the world, which might stop at multiple milk runs and get multiple things. We just care about the truck or the train. If you've got 10 shippers on the same truck or 3 shippers on the same train, we don't want to get $125 from each of them. We don't believe that meets the spirit of the rule set. So, we want to make sure that our spirit is we want to cover the training for our first responders out there and try to aid them if we can with the periodic, every so often replacement of maybe a meter that's gone bad, if there's the money for it. But again, our primary mission with this is to get some expertise out there and get that training done. It's going to be a long wait for me for the public comment period. Are there any other discussion items that anyone wants to bring up about anything at all? Okay. Well, if that's the case, I will once again reiterate the next steps. Odo commits to getting these red lines, this initial draft red line, out to you all as soon as possible. As we receive your comment letters, we will integrate them into a comment matrix, and we will then edit for a new draft red line for presentation in January. So also expect to see an invite to a January RAC meeting. And hopefully, if everything goes well, after that meeting, we will send it to FSEC for their questions and approvals. And at all points, members of the RAC are welcome to comment.
So I do have a couple things that I want you guys to think about, but I don't know if it's more appropriate to do it now or during public comment. I don't know.
Well, this is RAC specific right now, so you're a member of the RAC. You can comment away.
All right. So just, I just want all the RAC members and the people of Oregon know, and I do think in this case, I will speak for, Union Pacific and BNSF that we do support first responder training. Both of our railroads train tens of thousands of first responders every year for free on how to safely and effectively respond to hazmat emergencies involving rail. But as we discussed earlier, we are a common carrier. You know, we cannot pick and choose whether we move these materials. And that's why when you look at other states' rules, Missouri is a good example that common carriers are exempt from those fees because we don't have that choice. I'd also say that the fee that you're proposing is inconsistent with other hazmat and oil related fees in the state of Oregon, where it's a shipper fee. So the shipper would pay the fee, as an example, for oil in for movement of oil in the state of Oregon. So, you know, this fee that you're proposing on the carriers is inconsistent with other fees. And the reason why Missouri and a lot of other states, you don't see that the rail carriers are required to pay the fee because it's likely preempted by federal law. So I do think that your attorneys really need to take a look at it, and it is very likely that the railroads will push back hard against a carrier-based fee. And when you look at the Missouri rule, is specific that a shipper pays. Now, a carrier may decide to pay and then back charge their customer, but it's a shipper-based rule.
And one clarification on for RAC members. Once the Energy Facilities Siting Council considers the rule set, that's when the Department of Justice attorneys would make sure that it's all legally compliant, and they would issue a notice of proposed rulemaking following that legal review with any required changes. So there's a chance that things would change between the RAC and FSEC for legal reasons. So that would definitely be something to put in your comment letter on the red line if you think that's something that they should be particularly focused on.
Will do.
Does Washington have a similar rule for carriers?
Washington does charge. I am not an expert on their rule set yet.
Okay.
I would reiterate, what Patrick said about that is that this fee, while it is at least as proposed, responsible for the carriers, we tried to make sure that the carriers, both road and rail, understand that they are allowed to charge back to the shippers for this. So that's one thing. But yes, I got to do some more look at the common carrier and compare the various states' rules and how that's done, especially the federal preemption. All right. I suppose if there is nothing else, I don't see any other hands raised. I still see 12 people in the chat. If there's nothing else, you're more than free to go about your day. If there are any questions about moving forward or when to expect to see stuff from us, let us know. But for now, I unless anyone brings something up, I don't have further material at this time to present. And you can be expecting to see a red line version shortly.
Does the 33 days for the comment period for us start today?
Yes, it closes the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Okay,
That's when we expect to see the materials back from RAC members.
thank you.
Thanks for putting it together, Matt.
Yep. Well, we'll be on until the public shows up or not at 11:45, but the rest of you can certainly enjoy the rest of your days and have a good lunch.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care, Matt.
Take care, everybody.
Great presentation. Thanks, Matt. See you later.
Take it easy, Tom.
Thanks very much, Matt. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you, and you have a good one too.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye, Tiffany. I appreciate you being here.
Appreciate the invite. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'm probably gonna come back at 11:45 or just stay on here if that's okay.
Sure, Simone. Are you expecting other members to join for public comment or?
Not necessarily, but interested to see if anyone joins.
Okay, well, I'll be keeping an eye out for everyone for the next 40 minutes.
Goodness, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, I'm going to pause until we get someone here. Well, actually, I'll say it for the record. Going to stop recording now until someone from the member of the public shows up. I'm showing 1:12:20.